Welcome to Management Learning Meets, a series of short introductions to some of our most exciting papers and a chance to find out more from the researchers behind them. In this episode, we meet Ruth Weatherall, who is a lecturer in not-for-profit and social enterprise management at the University of Technology, Sydney. Ruth has recently completed a PhD at Victoria University of Wellington about the relationships between identity and change in a feminist organisation that supports survivors of domestic violence. Here, she talks to us about her paper in management learning entitled Writing the Doctoral Thesis Differently.
So the paper is about doctoral writing. So I look at doctoral writing as an academic genre. So a genre of academic writing that has specific conventions about it, so that when an emerging researcher is learning how to become a researcher, this is done through the writing process. And it's also about doctoral writing as a social practice. So it looks at these conventions both in terms of the structure and the writing style and how writing is actually done, but also the relationships that surround the writing. So relationships with supervisors, relationships with examiners, relationships with other doctoral students, and how that shapes what is said and how it is said in a doctoral thesis. And my paper specifically looks and challenges these conventions and asks how this could be done differently. So I use an example of my own thesis and how I wrote my thesis differently from a convention to explore what the benefits of those conventions are, but also what the limitations are if you're wanting to become a researcher who might be outside the traditional way of being a researcher in organization studies. I wanted to write a paper about doctoral writing for a lot of different reasons, and part of that was from my own experience of grappling with these conventions and feeling really uncomfortable with the traditional structure in particular that was introduction, literature review, methodology, findings, discussion, conclusion, and contributions, because I didn't feel that this particular structure allowed me to explore the facets of human experience that I met when I was doing my field work, which was in ethnography with feminists who were working in a social justice organisation that was helping survivors of domestic violence. And my experience in this organisation was incredibly emotional, it was embodied, it was upsetting, frustrating, amazing, wonderful, and trying to push that into the structure felt like I was missing so much of that experience. So in my own exploration of that, I found the limitations of the convention, and then in my conversations with other doctoral students, I found there was so much anxiety around trying to find the right structure and the right words, and I wanted to write a paper in support of others and try and show them and help us all understand that there were other ways to do this, and that those ways could be legitimized if we shared and circulated them and encouraged one another to take risks in what could otherwise be quite a constrained process. Doctoral writing is often framed as the beginning of an academic career, but I never understood doctoral writing as the beginning. PhD students are entering into a conversation that's already going on. So they're trying to negotiate and find their place within all of the different possibilities of what it means to be a scholar. And I think this paper is trying to show that, we are shaped by these conventions, but even as doctoral students, we have the ability to change and challenge what's going on. Another important thing I would love readers to take away from this is that I'm not necessarily proposing that the traditional things in a PhD in terms of reviewing the literature or making a clear contribution to knowledge are not necessarily things that we should put to one side, but are things that we need to rethink. So it's about looking and thinking for yourself how the personal, the theoretical, and the political are intertwined, and how that you want readers, your examiners, your supervisors, and others who read the doctoral thesis to understand how you're doing that. And if we embody our theoretical and political perspectives, that means that we can understand the concepts and the lives of the people that we're trying to understand in a different way. And I think that's really important if you are trying to make a novel contribution to knowledge, which is, of course, one of the key things that needs to come out of a doctoral thesis. The advice I'd give to PhD students would be that it can be a terrifying process writing your thesis. The first line of the abstract of my paper, I talk about how doctoral writing is a process of passion and terror, and anxiety and all of these things all at once. And that line came from me when I was at the beginning of writing the paper, talking to doctoral students on that day and asked them, how do you feel about your thesis today? And those were the words that they said to me. So we do feel all of those things all at once. And that can be really challenging when you want to be legitimate and you want to show that you are a scholar and that you can do these things. But my advice would be that there are different ways to do that and that there isn't one right way. And there's a lot of literature out there about writing differently, and you know your research well enough that you know the story and you know how you would want to communicate that. And we should take risks and know that there are communities out there to support you if you want to do that. To PhD supervisors, I would say that there are a lot of difficulties around supervision, particularly perhaps pressure from universities to get students to pass at a particular time, or that you're concerned that there will be pushback if doctoral students do things differently. But for me, and what was wonderful about my own supervisors who are incredibly supportive through this process, is that if a doctoral student is truly going to be creative and be free and be a new generation of scholar, as was what supervisors are helping them become, is that there are lots of ways to do that and we should explore and experiment. And I always say that all revolutions in thought come from revolutions in form as well as with content. So allowing doctoral students and encouraging them to think deeply about how they're writing and why they're writing their doctoral theses. So I would definitely say to examiners, when they're looking at a doctoral thesis that perhaps does something differently, is to question the value of that and not necessarily to push back on it, but to really engage in a conversation about what this could change about the future of academia itself. So how could this help new scholars do things differently in ways perhaps that haven't been done before?